At the time, I genuinely believed I was building the life I wanted. I was ambitious, creative, driven. I think society rewards people for functioning, not necessarily for understanding themselves. Your mind becomes trained to constantly anticipate problems before they happen. That's why many leaders struggle to rest properly. Intuition is often misunderstood. Some people immediately dismiss it, others romanticize it. But for me, intuition became less about mystical experiences. Last year, 2025, my mom passed away. And that experience hit me and changed me deeply. There's a version of pressure that people don't talk about enough. Not the loud kind, not the traumatic breakdowns people post online. I mean, the quiet pressure, the kind where your life still looks functional, but internally, something feels disconnected. You still work, you still show up, you still smile, reply, manage responsibilities, make decisions. But somewhere in the middle of all of that, you slowly stop feeling connected to yourself. And what makes it difficult is this: most people don't realize it's happening until life forces them to stop. Welcome to Insight Journey with Lovely. This is not just a podcast about motivation. This is a space where we explore psychology, human behavior, emotional patterns, identity, intuition, and the deeper reasons behind the decisions people make. Not from theory alone, but through lived experiences, real stories, reflection, and awareness. Because understanding your life is different from simply reacting to it. And before we begin exploring other people's stories in future episodes, I think it's important to start with mine. Not because my story is important, but because I want you to understand the perspective behind this space, how I get here, why I care about clarity so deeply, and why I believe so many people today are silently experiencing what I call the clarity gap. One thing I've learned over the years is this: people are very good at performing functionality, especially high functioning people, professionals, entrepreneurs, creatives, leaders, people who know how to keep going even when internally they're exhausted. I know this because I became one of them. Back in 2014, I was running a cafe and cake business while also organizing events. At the time, I genuinely believed I was building the life I wanted. I was ambitious, creative, driven, and externally, it looked productive. But psychologically, something interesting happens when your identity becomes attached to productivity. You stop asking, how do I feel? And you start asking, what still needs to be done? That shift changes everything because eventually your nervous system starts functioning in survival mode without you realizing it. And this is something I now talk about often in coaching and mentoring. Many people are not lazy, they're mentally overloaded. There's a difference. When someone certainly carries responsibility, pressure, uncertainty, expectations, emotional labor, their brain adapts to survival efficiency. They become functional, but not necessarily connected. And for years, that was me. I think society rewards people for functioning, not necessarily for understanding themselves. That's why many people look successful externally while internally feeling emotionally disconnected, mentally exhausted, unable to make clear decisions, or uncertain about who they become. And because they're still functioning, people assume they're okay until something interrupts the pattern. One of the biggest things I've observed in entrepreneurs and creatives is this: achievement can become identity. You become the organizer, the mentor, the producer, the leader, the strong one, and the dependable one. And over time, people stop relating to themselves as a human being and start relating to themselves as a role. I moved deeper into events and creative productions after the cafe business closed in 2017. I built projects, mentored models and creatives, collaborated with teams, worked with sponsors and productions, and became involved in platforms like IMTA and Asian Model Festival. I also created my own platforms like Runway Academy, Runway Supermodel, Asian Fashion Festival, under my own productions, Regal Star Productions. And I genuinely loved creativity. I still do. But one thing people don't see behind events and productions is the psychological load behind leadership. You carry people's expectations, deadlines, emotions, conflict, responsibility, and eventually your mind becomes trained to constantly anticipate problems before they happen. That's why many leaders struggle to rest properly. Their nervous system becomes conditioned for hypervigilance. Even in silence, the brain keeps scanning. This is also why burnout is often misunderstood. Burnout isn't always about doing too much physically. Sometimes burnout is prolonged emotional responsibility, constant decision making, unresolved stress cycles, emotional suppression, identity pressure. And many people don't recognize it because they've normalized stress as personality. There's another side to my story that shaped how I understand people. I've always been deeply intuitive. Even as a child, I would feel people's emotions strongly, sense energy shifts, and sometimes know things before they happened. For years, I struggled to understand it because intuition is often misunderstood. Some people immediately dismiss it, others romanticize it. But for me, intuition became less about mystical experiences and more about deep human observation. When you become highly aware of behavior, emotional patterns, tone shifts, micro reactions, emotional inconsistencies, you begin understanding people differently. And this became incredibly valuable later in mentoring, coaching, leadership, and human connection. Because most communication is not verbal. People reveal themselves through hesitation, avoidance, emotional reactions, body language, contradictions, emotional energy. Sometimes what people say and what they actually feel are completely different, and many life problems begin there. Last year, 2025, my mom passed away 2 months before Asian Fashion Festival, and I still had to continue leading. And that experience hit me and changed me deeply because grief does something psychologically powerful. It interrupts illusion. Suddenly, the things that I used to feel urgent don't feel the same anymore. And when the event finally ended, everything internally collapsed into silence. I lost motivation, direction, clarity, and what I realized was this: sometimes it doesn't break you to destroy you. Sometimes it interrupts you because you can no longer continue unconsciously. That season led me into therapy and eventually into life coaching. And what stood out to me immediately was this: most people are not struggling because they're incapable. They're struggling because they lack clarity. Clarity about themselves, their patterns, their fears, their identity, their emotional conditioning, and the difference between intuition and fear. That became the foundation of my work, not motivation, awareness, because awareness change behavior naturally. And that eventually became the inspiration behind my upcoming book, the Clarity Gap Inner Works series. This book explores emotional overwhelm, decision paralysis, identity transitions, burnout, intuition, behavioral patterns, and the psychological gap between knowing something feels wrong and knowing what to do next. Because that gap is what many people stay stuck for years. And this podcast expands that conversation even further. Starting from episode 2, we'll begin exploring real stories together. Anonymous stories, personal experiences, life transitions, human behavior. And we'll unpack them not from judgment but from awareness. Because understanding your patterns can completely change the direction of your life. Listen carefully. Maybe life has been asking you to slow down long enough to understand yourself differently. Not just perform, not just survive, but actually understand. This is Insight Journey with Lovely, and this journey is about clarity, awareness, and becoming more conscious about the life you're creating.